We are now getting a 12-team playoff, maybe even a 14-team playoff in the future. With all this playoff talk, I think we are taking the concept itself for granted. Not that long ago, we didn't have any kind of playoff at all, and the BCS reigned supreme. So last time I did one of these videos, I recapped the first year of the 14 playoff, the 2014 season. This time, let's go all the way back to the 2011 college football season, a year that needed a playoff and didn't have it. Earlier in the calendar year, Cam Newton and the Auburn Tigers defeated Chip Kelly's Oregon Ducks in the BCS National Championship. 2011 season was in the middle of a dominant SEC run. An SEC team had won the BCS National Championship every year since 2006, and the conference was 9-2 in the BCS Championship era. This year was particularly SEC-centric, SEC-dominant. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with the defending champions, Auburn Tigers. They had a lot of losses from last year's title team, including superstar Cam Newton, who went to the Carolina Panthers in the NFL draft. So this season got off to a shaky start for the Tigers, almost losing to Utah State in their first game of the season, then losing to Clemson in their third game of the season, and basically eliminating themselves from national championship contention with the loss to Arkansas. It was actually pretty good this year. The Razorbacks were not as good as Alabama and LSU, though. As we know, Alabama and LSU are the big dogs in the SEC West. They have been for a long time, including this 2011 season. Both teams this year in particular had stifling defenses, which is usually the case for these early Nick Saban Alabama-led teams. As for LSU, they started off the season beating last year's national championship runner-up, the Oregon Ducks, in a huge win. That was a huge statement win for them. And this kind of started the tradition of Pac-12 teams going south and getting their asses kicked by some SEC team. So Alabama and LSU were both undefeated when it came to their annual November rivalry game, this time in Tuscaloosa. This is where we get to our first problem this year. While these two teams were certainly the two best teams, they were also kind of boring to watch. Their offenses were passable, while their defenses were top class. So this first game between the two rivals ended up being 9-6 for LSU. That was the final score. That wasn't the first quarter score, not even the halftime score, the final score. Not a single touchdown was scored, and it took overtime for LSU just to get that extra field goal to win the game. Kickers were reigning supreme as well in this era, I guess. So LSU went on to beat Georgia in the SEC championship game and became the clear #1 team. As for Nick Saban and 11-1 Alabama, we'll leave it for later. So as for other conferences like the Big Ten and the ACC, no one was particularly super good that year as for, national championship contention. So we're going to move on to the Pac-12. This was actually the first year of the Pac-12, which it was previously the Pac-10. The Pac-12 just added Utah and Colorado. Obviously, the previous Pac-10 champions, Oregon, they were the favorites. And as I mentioned, Oregon lost earlier to LSU, so there was no room for error for the Ducks. And another big November rivalry turned up against undefeated Stanford Cardinal. This was David Shaw's first season in the Bay Area after Jim Harbaugh left for the 49ers. The Ducks ended up beating the Cardinal in a classic Pac-12 high-scoring game, 53-30. The following week was what I call Pac-12 cannibalism. I'm sure I've made videos before. I'll link it up. But basically, the Ducks lost to the USC Trojans the very next week after beating Stanford. That left Stanford 11-1 with no conference championship. They didn't make it to the conference championship. Instead, Oregon did. They were 11-2 as conference champions and a win over Stanford, but with losses to USC and LSU. So in this case, we could put both Pac-12 and SEC teams in a hypothetical 14 playoff. But there's another team this year that had something else to say. Oklahoma and Texas have more or less run the Big 12 until they've left the Big 12 for the SEC now. But they're, we know they're the two big brand schools. out of that conference. This year though, their little brother Oklahoma State had other plans. Led by the mullet man himself, Mike Gundy, Oklahoma State got off to a 10-0 start and were the #2 team in the nation when they went to Jack Trice Stadium to play the underdog Iowa State Cyclones. This was a double overtime classic, and the Cyclones ended up beating the Cowboys on a Jeff Woody walk-off touchdown. Here's the clip.
Woody. Touchdown, they did it!
This upset basically cost the Cowboys a chance at a national championship. Now, I'm sure you see the dilemma here, dear viewer. We have undefeated LSU, who is the undefeated #1 team. No doubt about that. They have great wins against Oregon, Alabama, and Georgia. But then we kind of have a three-way tie of wins and losses for Power 5 teams. 11-1 Alabama, 11-1 Stanford, and 11-1 Oklahoma State. No team ever played in a conference championship game, but Oklahoma State was technically the Big 12 champion. Stanford's one loss was against Pac-12 champion Oregon, and Alabama had great wins with one loss to the #1 team in the country. In the end, basically the BCS picked Alabama, which technically you could say was the best choice because the Crimson Tide did end up beating the Tigers 21-0 in a pretty boring national championship game. Stanford and Oklahoma State never got a shot though. They actually went on to play each other in the Fiesta Bowl, which was a much more entertaining game where the Cowboys won 41-38 in overtime. So in conclusion, this year would have been a great year for a 4-team playoff. At least we can be grateful now that we have one, and we're actually getting an extended one now. I just thought it'd be fun to look back at a time where there was no playoff whatsoever and we were stuck with the BCS system, so that we can be grateful for what we have right now. Make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you guys all for watching. Peace.